As a child, Boris Johnson famously dreamt of becoming world king. Whilst he may not have reached quite those heights, his time as leader was nothing short of extraordinary, culminating in a spectacular fall from grace that saw critics accusing him of destroying Britain's place on the world stage. Tonight, I sit down with the former Prime Minister ahead of the publication of his memoirs to discuss his time in office. He's been called a political Houdini, with a talent for breaking the rules and surviving scandals against the odds.
Do you regret your comment, sir?
I want you to have a cup of tea.
Skills, characteristics that took him to the pinnacle of British politics.
The time has come to act, to take decisions, to give strong leadership and to change this country for the better.
His political memoir shows few regrets and, one might argue, little insight.
Let's get Brexit done.
There's no doubt that he was loved by many until he wasn't.
Boris out! Boris out!
He takes aim at Brexit mastermind Dominic Cummings, successor Rishi Sunak, and even campaigning footballer Marcus Rashford. Many have questioned whether he had the character for the challenges of being Prime Minister.
Does the truth matter?
I think it does, and I think it's very important.
Not least in an unprecedented pandemic.
There was no party, no COVID rules were broken.
His fictional party was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
In his book, Johnson remains unrepentant. He says the UK's heroic vaccine rollout wouldn't have been possible without Brexit, which drove the EU potty, he says. He describes apologising for Partygate.
People had a right to expect better of their Prime Minister.
As a catastrophic mistake. There's no doubt he is one of the most charismatic characters British politics has seen for a generation.
Hi. Good morning.
So how did he squander his 80-seat majority? Today, Johnson speaks to me about the witch hunts, the plots, and how the whole damn establishment was set against him. Boris Johnson, thank you very much for joining me. In your book, you say that people have referred to you over the course of your career as a renegade, a buffoon, a thug, a bull in a china shop. How would you describe yourself? Or another way of putting it is, who is the real Boris Johnson?
Well, it's perfectly true. Thank you very much, Tom, for having me on. It's perfectly true that there is plenty in Unleashed, the book I'm just bringing out, of self-recrimination. I try to examine the things I got wrong, but I also want to try to tell a story about what I believe in and about belief in Britain, which is really at the heart of the book. And so if you ask who's the real Boris Johnson, so my political identity is really defined by that belief. Somebody who is relentlessly positive, but also positive about this country.
Well, let's talk about Brexit. Is, as you say, a defining part of your legacy. Isn't it, truthfully, we've known each other a long time, isn't it fair to say that in your decision to go for the Out campaign, there was a pretty healthy chunk of personal ambition that you thought that you'd probably lose, but you'd endear yourself to the Tory membership? Would you acknowledge that there is some fairness in that suggestion?
I don't. I think what people forget is what would have happened to Leave if we had lost. We would have been treated like a kind of failed powerlight frond of has-beens and losers.
You'd have been the darling of the members. You would, you know that. That was part of the calculation, surely.
No, because actually what would have happened was everybody would have wanted to move on. And the story would have been all about our future within Europe. And, it was a big, what I'm trying to get over is that it was a terribly, terribly difficult decision.
Okay,
and I came down in favour of coming out.
Millions of people put their faith in you. They believed in it. They believed what you said about it. And then it was chaos afterwards, as you acknowledge in your book. And you blame a lot of people for that. You blame David Cameron, you blame Theresa May later, you blame the EU. The one person you don't blame is you, and people will find that amazing. You told us that we should do this, and you hadn't devoted any serious thought to what came next.
Come on. So I wanted to win an argument, and I believed in freedom, and I believed that our country had a great, great future.
But you were the leader. You were leading us into this.
What I wasn't trying to do, and I don't think, and certainly what Michael Gove wasn't trying to do, we weren't trying to form the next government. What we expected, and what I think, everybody expected, was that the Cameron government, having called a referendum a yes/no choice for the people, Leave Remain choice for the people, would bring forward a white paper.
Why? He didn't believe it. What made you possibly think that would be the outcome?
Because every other European leader, when they hold referendums, decides, once the people have voted, decides what to do and stays in office. So it's not normal for the Prime Minister, having asked for a referendum vote, suddenly to evacuate the stage. Now, you're perfectly right that we, me, Michael Gove, others, suddenly had an awful lot on our plates because we were the Prime Minister had left, and we were in the position of having to try to
make it work,
to take over.
All right, where are we now on Brexit is my next question, and I want to drill into that. Do you accept that everyone watching this programme is poorer now as a result of Brexit and is likely to be poorer for the foreseeable future because of Brexit?
No, I certainly don't. And let me just
give you a statistic. To the Office of Budget Responsibility, the government's own, formerly your own financial watchdog, says that imports will be 15% down in the long-term future than they would have been, and exports, and that the size of our national economy will be 3.8% smaller. You're shaking your head, but these are the facts according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, which has now been looking at this for quite some time. That is an enormous sum of money. That is an enormous sum of money.
Can I just try and respond on Brexit and the type of Brexit that I wanted and why I still believe in it? Because when I was Prime Minister, we faced an appalling pandemic. And then, thanks to the brilliance, genius of British scientists, we got some vaccines. And there was AstraZeneca and there was Pfizer and several others. And because of the type of Brexit that we had negotiated, and which we had fought for, let me complete this point, we were able to license those vaccines weeks and weeks faster than any other European country at a time when many, many people were dying every day.
Said you could have derogated from the European regulation anyway.
We would never have done so. We would never have done
but
so.
You could have
we were in the EMA. We would have been in the European vaccine program, and you know that fine well. But because we were out, we did things differently, and so by March 2021, we had vaccinated 45% of the UK adult population, and of the over 80s, probably getting on for 90, 100%. The EU had done 10%. That enabled us to come out of lockdown restrictions faster and, to your economic point, to have the fastest economic recovery in 2021 in the G7. And that was because of Brexit.
Let's pick something else. Trade. This was going to be the great freedom. We've done 71 trade deals. 68 of them were rollovers from the EU deals. The others are tiny. We still haven't done a deal with America. We haven't done a deal with China. We haven't done a deal with India. Where is this great world you promised us?
The India deal is coming down the track. The deals with America depend very much on what happens in the presidential elections. I'm sure you want to ask about. But if you look at the UK's economic performance since 2016, it compares very favourably with other countries that are still in the EU. And the key thing about Brexit now is to take advantage of those freedoms and not to do, and that's why believing in Britain is about doing things differently.
I understand all these arguments, but the reality is, you talk about immigration. That was a big concern. 333. No, let me finish. 333,000 people came to this country in 2015. For 2023, it was 685,000.
let me
You talk about regret. 9% of people, 9% of people think Brexit worked out well. 57% of people think we should go back in. That is the legacy of Brexit, is it not?
No, I think that the legacy of Brexit is that it saved many lives of elderly and vulnerable people at a particularly crucial time for our country. It has given us the freedom to do things differently and better and in the interests of the people of this country.
Let's talk about COVID. COVID hits. You describe it very vividly in your book. In the early days of COVID, January, February 2020, you didn't attend 5 COBRA meetings.
Yes, but COBRA meetings, normally speaking, are just government meetings that take place about the issue, any issue of the hour.
We know that at one stage your Shakespeare biography was due out in April. Were you in that period focused on of 2020? Were you focused on writing them?
Nonsense. That is complete.
So that's a no. You weren't in any way writing that book at that time.
Total myth. You know, this was a new disease. People were not sure which way it would go, and to get to people's concern about the speed of that first lockdown in March.
Do you think people would be alive today if you'd acted quicker?
I can't know that, but what I can tell you is that we had a series of ever-intensifying steps leading up to the March the 23rd of 2020 lockdown. And had I actually gone for full lockdown earlier, that would have been in advance of what the scientists were actually asking us to do. And so it would have been a quite extraordinary thing for a Prime Minister to have ordered the country to take this completely novel step and incarcerate themselves at home before the scientists were even saying that we should do that.
Before we get onto the real question, I want to ask you another question, which is that you write very vividly in your book, Unleashed, about the fact that you almost died.
Yeah, my oxygen levels went down to 72 or something, which is pretty bad. 70 things can get pretty nasty. But and I went into ICU and I saw, sadly, many people like myself, slightly overweight, middle-aged men. And it's the point I want to make is I know how terrible a disease COVID is. I really do. And as I try to explain in the book, probably, I was groggier coming out, and it took longer for me to recover than I tried to let on, because I had to get back in the saddle and I had to try to give leadership on all these difficult questions. But it left me with an absolute horror of the disease and a deeply serious determination to make sure that we followed the scientific advice and that we protected the people.
We need to obviously talk about Partygate. I got to those sections of the book and it seemed to me, well, in terms you basically say it wasn't a big deal, I regret apologising. Is that really your position?
No,
that you regret apologising?
No.
That is what you say in the book.
Let me explain what I said, because if you look at Unleashed, as I say, there's plenty.
I've read it. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it says. That it was basically a load of nonsense, and you regret apologising. Do you regret apologising to the Queen?
Let me give you my own.
Answer that. Do you regret apologising to the Queen?
Let me give you my own view.
Well, if you answer my question, let's then perhaps go on to have your view. Do you regret apologising to the Queen?
Look, I don't discuss my conversations with the Queen.
That wasn't my question. My question was, do you regret apologising to the Queen?
Let me explain what I meant by that observation, because it's very, very important. If you read the book, you'll see there's plenty of ways in which I deeply recriminate myself for things I got wrong. And I blame myself in all sorts of ways and for mistakes I made. But what I was trying to say there was, I think that the blanket apology, the sort of apology I issued right at the beginning, I think the trouble with it was that afterwards, all the accusations that then rained down on officials who'd been working very hard in Number 10 and elsewhere were thought to be true. And by apologising, I had sort of inadvertently validated the entire corpus. I
get that, but
and it wasn't fair on those people.
Okay, I've got to jump here because there are millions of people who will be watching this, who will be on the edge of their seats at this point for a very simple reason. Let's just wind back a minute. as you know, we broke quite a lot of the Partygate stories. I was in this newsroom when Paul Brand came in with an email from Martin Reynolds, your private secretary. This is like quite at the start of COVID. The rules have only just been adjusted after the first lockdown to say that you can only meet one person outside. But this is at a time where people are not being able to go to hospital to say goodbye to their dying relatives. People are dying alone. People are not allowed to go to funerals. People are agonizingly observe the rules. You have told us that people will die if we don't observe the rules.
Yes.
And here is your private secretary writing to over 100 people, inviting them to a party in the Downing Street Garden.
Sorry, hang on
and
a second.
People can't understand
course,
why you wouldn't be paralytically apologetic about that.
Because actually I was at the time. If you remember what happened.
But now you're saying, "Oh, it wasn't a big deal. I shouldn't have apologised."
Well, if you look at the reason the Downing Street Garden was used was because it was thought to be a much safer environment, and we had to maintain distancing. But look, we were in this newsroom with arrows saying, "Walk round this way." So were we.
We were outside, agonisingly sticking with one person. Well, you weren't. You were inviting 100 people to the garden. It's madness.
But that was outside. I really, really don't think that those officials thought that they were setting out to break the rules.
But they were breaking the rules.
They thought that they were doing something. They were working round the clock. And they thought they were within the framework.
But they
of
were
the rules.
repeatedly found to be breaking the rules by the police.
I don't know.
We saw members of your staff laughing on a video about breaking the rules. The reason I'm pressing this is that I just know there were people watching this programme who are really upset with you, and they want to know that you understand.
Of course I understand it, and you can't say that I haven't been exposed to over the last few years to the full force of people's anger and indignation.
I've got to press this. There were stories of drunkenness, physical altercations, and I'm like, I can't.
There were stories, Tom, where those stories substantiated. I can only give you my honest opinion of it all now, right? Who investigated this thing? Why don't you tell our viewers who investigated it?
I don't want to go down the avenue of Sue Gray.
And who is, just to remind our viewers who Sue Gray is.
Sue Gray is a leading civil servant.
What post does she currently hold?
We're not going down this road.
Why not?
Because no one disputes
what post
the
does she currently
essential
hold? What
facts.
post does she currently hold?
I asked you about Martin Reynolds inviting
tell
100 people.
I will tell our viewers what post Sue Gray currently
I know
holds.
everyone knows what Sue Gray
don't.
does.
I'm going to tell
this
them.
is unfair on Sue Gray, who is not here to defend herself. You are here to defend yourself, so I'm making.
I'm so sorry. Well, let me just.
I'm asking the questions on behalf of our viewers.
She is the chief of staff of the leader.
We're all well aware of that. This is what really began the slide for you.
Well, let's address that. Okay? Let's address that, because I don't think we're going to agree on the other thing. I feel deeply about people's indignation. I understand when I look back and I look at the role of Sue Gray.
That's the precise question I'm asking.
Let me just go.
I thought you were sorry, but in the book you're not.
Well, I obviously bitterly regret mistakes that I made. But what I was trying to say is that by a blanket apology at the outset, I seem to inculpate everybody for every accusation, and you've just made several false ones just now, every accusation that was subsequently made. And they were made, by the way, by somebody who's now, what is she? Anyone remember? Chief of Staff to the leader of the Labour Party.
What your critics would say about you is, this is the story of your life. You just don't think the rules apply to you.
No, on the contrary. I think that so in July 2022, when I resigned, when Partygate had been running, and things had been very tough, don't forget that we were only a couple of points behind, at one point put us 2 points behind in the polls. I had a very positive agenda, which you will discover in Unleashed. We were getting on with a lot of wonderful things.
We haven't got
and I had no. I had every hope that I would go on, and every prospect of going on to win the next election.
I want to come to the legacy at the end, but just very quickly before we do that, some quick fire questions. Is Donald Trump telling the truth when he says he won the 2020 election?
No.
Trump or Harris, who would you like to see win?
Not for a UK Prime Minister. I had good relations with Biden and with Trump. Job of a UK Premier is to be on the best possible terms.
But you're not Premier anymore. So who would you?
Yeah, I know. But but that's still the position.
Okay. Who would you like to see as leader of the Tory party?
I'm not going to. There's lots of good candidates, or 4 good candidates.
You've said that we need another referendum on whether we should be in the European Convention for Human Rights. Only one candidate, I believe, is Robert Jenrick, is in favour of leaving.
Yes, I'm not. I'm not.
So does that mean you
I'm
support
not
him?
certain it has to be a referendum, but I do think that the court.
So you support Jenrick?
That is that's a.
That's a leading question.
I think there's probably some logical fallacy that you've just committed, but I can't.
Okay,
it's
finally,
too long since I.
Who was a better premier, Sunak or Truss?
Look, I think both.
I think I can ask you to answer that.
As I say in Unleashed.
You don't say anything about who you thought was a better prime minister out of Sunak.
Okay, but I say that they both had good qualities and they both had their share of bad luck. I think what everybody needs to do in our party is get back to the winning agenda that we had. And in 2019, we put together an enormous coalition of people. I'm afraid what we did wrong was we basically turned our backs on 2 vast sectors of our coalition. And we need to get them back.
Okay.
And if you read Unleashed,
yeah,
you will discover.
If you read Unleashed, you'll discover that you think a lot of people betrayed you. Rishi Sunak, Lee Kane, Dominic Cummings. The list is very long. Michael Gove. Should I point out the obvious by saying that the one thing they have in common, you appointed them all? Does that make you a terrible judge of character?
Look, I think that people have different strengths and for different roles. And if I look all those individuals, actually all the ones that you've mentioned, played an important part in delivering what was very, very difficult at the time, which was the type of real constitutional independence that we need.
You won an enormous victory in 2019, a historic, unprecedented victory. 3 years later, you're out. A totally unprecedented situation. 62 members of your own government. That's never happened before like that. Do you think, you give the impression in the book the problem was them?
No,
you acknowledge that the problem might have been you.
Yeah,
and
I do say that. I mean, there's yards and yards of self-loathing and self-explanation. I do say that. But I also think is that, if I had a regret, it's that because of COVID, I wasn't able to spend enough time in a pretty crucial period talking to colleagues and really making sure they were okay.
Anthony Seldon, who I guess you would call more or less the sort of official biographer of prime ministers, says you're the worst prime minister in British history. In the whole of history, I mean, arguably from when the office was reformed after Lloyd George, but that was the allegation, worse than Truss, worse than anyone. What do you say?
I don't know this guy very well, but I think that's complete nonsense. I think that you will find a pretty extraordinary story that we packed in to 3 years. And amongst other things, what we did was we delivered full constitutional freedom and independence for this country of a kind that was very, very hard to do and that was deeply resisted by many other people, which I think was totally the right thing for the UK. And not only did we deliver freedom and independence for our own country, but thanks to the activism of the UK government, which was made possible by Brexit, we were instrumental in protecting another great European country from having its own, Ukraine, from having its own freedom and independence extinguished. And that was quite a lot to do just in 3 years, and I've hardly got going.
One brief final question. I read 700 pages of the book, and at the end...
738. You must have skipped 38.
I read them all. Okay. At the end, I was left with one question, perhaps, that I think everyone who reads the book will be left with, and it is a simple one. Is your political career over?
Look, I'm very, very glad you asked that, because I'm living a life of blameless obscurity in rustic obscurity.
Blameless obscurity here in a television studio in front of millions.
Writing books. And my chances of returning to politics, as I think I've said before, about as good as my being reincarnated as an olive, blinded by a champagne cork, locked in a disused fridge, or decapitated by a frisbee. But in any case, the answer to your question is to be found in the pages, the 738 pages of Unleashed, which is now unleashed.
I think I'll take that as a return is possible.
Where is unleashed?
And well, I think we're probably aware of the title by now, so I don't think you need to produce a copy, Mr. Johnson. Thank you very much indeed for
Very
giving
good to see
us
you,
the
Tom.
time.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.